All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
designers,
and performers.
Yay. What's up, everybody?
Hey, John Gaal.
Hey, guys. Welcome to another episode of Volta Percussion. Today's episode, we're talking about
The psychology of education? I don't know what's a better way to say it. I don't have
Rob,
the best
didn't you
way
write
to
it
say
down? You wrote it down, Rob.
I don't think that was a working title.
Yeah, the psychology of educators. And I think what really was the catalyst of this one is how does our personal psychology, methodology, pedagogy project to our students? Right?
For sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those are a lot of big, fancy words.
Yeah.
So for everyone who doesn't understand, I guess it's just what do we want to portray to our kids?
Yeah, I bet, they can learn something too. You know what I mean? If you don't know what pedagogy is, go pick up a dictionary. They exist out in the world. You know what I mean?
Listen, it's some of those words that you throw around in a job interview when you know you're going to ask them for like $3,000 or $4,000 more per year on your salary. Yes, I know what the word pedagogy means, so don't try to lowball me, bro.
Right.
But you're a percussionist. Can you really teach brass?
I've been asked that.
Oh,
I have been asked that in a job interview.
low ball. So how does one's personal experience roll into how they teach?
I would say largely when you first start teaching, or at least I can speak for myself, a lot of the stuff that I taught my students was just me regurgitating what I already had been taught. And I see it a lot with a lot of my schools, specifically with my technicians. Like a lot of times they'll just give just blanket information sometimes, just because that was the issue when they were marching and they were cleaning a specific skill set or whatever. You know what I mean? You're just kind of giving it out. And I think that it kind of takes a little bit of trial and error for you to figure out exactly what stuff you learned actually applies one-to-one and what stuff you may need to think about it differently. Because everything doesn't apply, one-to-one from drum corps to high school or whatever level you're teaching.
I would agree with that. I think there is a level of care and concern that you have to have for the individuals that you're teaching, and trying to figure out what's the best way to allocate the information that you've got on a certain topic and relay it to those students. You know what I mean? Because every student's not going to learn the same way. Every student is not at the same level of knowledge or learning. Every student is not capable of taking in the information that you've got to give them at that moment. You know what I'm saying? Like what I recall, like coming off of a drum corps tour and immediately going to like a high school rehearsal with like 2 snares, 2 quads, and 4 basses, and trying to get them to play with the kind of sound we were playing with that I just got off tour with. And it's like, maybe I needed to take a step back. But once again, when you're 19 and you're coming fresh off a tour, you're like, I need the sound out of the drums now. And it's like they will not ever get to that point that I'm trying to convey to them in that week. You know what I mean? Like maybe over time we can build segmental items, but I mean like coming in the first week off a tour, me trying to, okay, we're going to power out some accent tap today to really build up your sound quality. Like one day an accent tap ain't going to get them sounding the way that in my head I think a snare line should sound like, with 2 snare drummers, you know what I mean? Or 2 quad drummers. Like you got to take it back to formula from Jump Street. And I didn't learn that lesson until years later, but it took some trial and error, you know what I mean? To kind of figure out what is it that I can actually use from the information that I received over the summer that's going to help this group right now?
I think you brought up a good point, Elanders, when you said like the in my head part, especially when we're talking about like the psychology of teaching, and because we all have the hard part as a teacher is getting the experience to know what you want something to sound like so that you can explain it. When you're 19, you've only experienced, the drum lines or the front ensembles you've stood in or the percussion ensembles you've stood in. So you're like trying to emulate that. And then you're like, all right, I can't get them to sound like, the Glassmen or, the Phantom Regiment or whoever, but I can get them like, you have to evolve from what does a good percussion ensemble sound like to what does a good instrument sound like, but also the experience of the kids. Like we can't ask them to know anything beyond their own experience. So like when we're expecting things of kids, we've got to keep in mind of what they've experienced in terms of expectation, because I think when I first started teaching, I was like, everybody can do the same thing. It's just drums, hit it, play the rolls, play the laterals, just do it. Just do it. But it's not that. And the older I've gotten, it's like, okay, we've got to meet each individual kid, not each individual section where they are, but each individual kid, and then take them as far as they can go. And that fourth vibe player is not able to do what my center marimba player is able to do. And it doesn't make that kid a bad kid. It doesn't make that kid a lazy kid, which took me a long time to realize. It just means that kid has not had the experience that the center marimba has had in order to lead them to want to be as good as that person or to be able to discern the information in the same way that person has had. Because I can spew every factoid about everything that I know to that kid, and when they're still like, which hand is it?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much knowledge I have when they're like, when I'm like, raise your right hand and they raise their left hand, we're not working on double strokes or lateral strokes. We're working on which hand is the left hand.
I really liked what you said, Ryan, when you said you kind of have to make a individual plan for each student. Like I'm, as you guys know, I'm getting my online certification here for Texas. And so I think another thing that's really important and one thing that's really been preached a lot with this online class is setting goals and checking out your state standards for what kids at certain levels need to know. And so like for Texas, you have the Texas Education Agency, TEA website, and on there you have the TEKS. I hope I say it right. The Texas Education Knowledge and Skills, I think, or standards. I should know this stuff. But anyway, like it talks about each level from elementary, middle, and high school, what each kid needs to know. And this is really interesting for me because the new school that I'm going to be teaching at, it doesn't have a feeder program. It's just freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors. It's like a magnet school. And with my experience of teaching drum corps and teaching, around the country, I really am going to have to figure out multiple ways to teach these kids because not one assessment fits all, right? But at the same time, online, it says you can't make like an individual lesson plan for each student. That's just too much time. But you kind of have to group the students based on their skill sets and make a individual, I guess, routine or assessment for those groups, right? It's really just making education accessible to all students and meeting them where they're at and helping them along at whatever progress they can go.
So with a school like that, where you said like there's not really a designated feeder program, is it like a lottery or application for them to get into that type of school?
I don't know much about how they get into the school. I do know like the school, I guess, kind of follows the pathway of more like a technical college in the sense that they go there to learn a specific skill set. Most of the time it could be like automotive, it could be health science, a lot of nursing, because the school is right next to a hospital. And so most of the students going there are going to learn more for the health service types of things. It's a very small band, but like I said, you have to figure out how to give them that fine arts credit, teach them where they're at, knowing that most likely most of these kids are not going to pursue music after high school. And so you could, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I mean, so at that point, you as the director or one of the directors has to really talk with your main director and kind of communicate how do you want the vibe and the culture of your band. Is it going to be more of a like pep band, show band? Is it going to be a little bit more core style, competitive? Or is it going to be something else entirely? And that's something I'm talking with him about, because you have your short-term goals, right? You're just trying to get the kids in to stay for a long period of time to build something. And then you have your long-term goals. What do you want to be? Do you want to take it somewhere? Can you increase the numbers? Because it's also a numbers game. The bigger your band is, the more directors you can have, the more education you can share out with your kids. So there's a lot of factors you have to consider when you're building a program. But everyone already knows that.
Well, one of the things that you said kind of triggered something for me in terms of like, how does the psychology of what we do play into the fact that most of the students that we teach are not going to be pursuing music long term? You know what I mean? Like, it's more social and it's something to do more so than it's something I'm, getting ready to learn to move on to the next stage in. Because I find like in my area, I don't see as many music majors come out of those programs, even like the very high competitive programs. Because I know like, you have a couple of different types of programs. You have the programs that are just there to support the football team. You have the programs that, they do the concert stuff really well, but they don't really care too much about what the marching band is doing. Or you have the programs that are super competitive all year round. Like, and, they're starting marching band at the beginning of April, and then concert season starts like right at the beginning of October. You know what I mean? Like, it's literally like transition outside of school rehearsals constantly. But I wonder, from a psychological standpoint, is there something that changes with us if we stood back and looked at the statistics of how many of these students are actually going to pursue music afterwards, and is it worth it? You know what I mean? Like, sometimes I think back to like how hard I push kids to learn everything. And it was like, I realized I was trying to teach them like good, like study habits and being professional, except like, obviously we're always trying to teach them more than what music has to offer. But just from a music education standpoint, like if we just narrow it down to just music education, if I could statistically put together numbers of how many of these students out of 20 or 30 kids are actually going to pursue music after high school, is it worth it? The amount of time, effort, energy?
I would say I think it has to do with, again, music. It's kind of like, Kobe Bryant said that sports is the greatest metaphor for life. I guess if I were into basketball and into sports, I would say that. But I would say for me as a music educator, I feel like music is, just because, again, I think that's the connecting point that makes it worth it, is that you're learning something. It's really, as much as we want to make it about the music, it's really not about the music. You know what I mean? It's really about what the music represents in your life, which is communication and that connection point. You know what I mean? And you can think about all the lessons that you learned about learning this particular piece of music, or, you know, it always comes back to the community aspect of it and that connection, because music is that universal language of like, there are some things that you're not able to express with words, and like that's where music comes in. And I feel like there's so many different things that you can learn by just remembering what it feels like to not know how to do something but search for the knowledge to do it, to not know how to do something and be okay to take a risk in front of other people, to be able to learn things like on the fly, and have other people watch you learn how to do something. Like, those are vital life skills that I feel like you can take into whatever your area of expertise may be. But again, it's worth it as long as we're making the metaphor work for students, that they can see that it applies to anything outside of what they're doing. Obviously, you want the excellence to be there, but it's never just about the excellence. It's never just about the music. It's always about, you know, outside of band as well. So,
Ryan, you were going to say something?
Well, I forget what I was going to say, but I do think we just have to. This is going to sound weird as a music educator, but treat music more as the vehicle that we're using to get the kids to their goals. You know, because I think if you put it in terms of like, I'm teaching this to get more kids into music school, well, then you're putting your end goal as an educator in the hands of the students. What if they like band but just don't want to go into music? You know, what if they don't envision themselves as a band director, but, you know, we can teach them, as we were saying earlier, the life lessons that they need. And not only I feel like the life lessons, but, you know, a big motto for me is, if I can teach my kids to be as good as they can be at music, or as great as they can be at music, then they've learned the process it takes to be great at something to what their level of grade is. And just apply that process. Obviously, you're going to need different tools and different terminology and different technology because it's not music, but apply that same kind of process to whatever you're doing in life, you know? And I tell my students all the time, like, I don't care what your goal is in life to do. I was like, if you want to flip burgers at McDonald's, that's great. Like, be the best burger flipper that you can be at McDonald's. Like, have pride in that, you know? And I think that's another one, like the students taking pride in their work and learning to take pride in their work is a huge thing that we can instill in them. And it, again, this is all, I feel like, more mental than it is physical, you know? Because I think we're in a day and age, and it being older, being of the previous generation, sometimes it's hard to swallow that it's not just about like, this is the goal, we're trying to accomplish the goal, what do we have to do to accomplish the goal, let's go. You know, like, we can do that in our independent ensembles, whether it be drum corps, independent drumline. And the older and longer I stay in teaching, I'm realizing that there's a little bit more coaching that needs to happen, not from a education standpoint, but from a mental maturity, endurance, durability standpoint that kids need. So, you know, again, I think if you're looking at teaching from purely like getting your kids to move on past high school, it's not worth that time. But I would also argue that if you're looking to teach to just win trophies, is it really worth the time for that either? Like, is the work and the stress that you're putting on your life worth that time also? Because when we're talking about experience, our students can see when we're stressed out. You know, I had an ensemble, 2015, I had a concert open ensemble that won prelims by 3 points and was second in finals. Arguably the most successful ensemble, scholastic ensemble I had taught that year. And the second school I taught at was a Scholastic A group that had the highest score and still has the highest score in our local circuit to date. That winter, I fought through so much chest pain trying to from being so stressed out to try to get those students to be at 100% clarity. And when it was all said and done, I looked at it and I go, okay, those kids were great. They have the highest score in the state, probably have the highest score for a long time. These kids were great. They got a silver medal. They probably should have won, but they medaled. Like, all of that is great, but I am a mess.
Yeah, that's tough.
Heavy.
It makes you wonder at that point, like, is it a law of averages? Like, the more people that you have involved, would your stress level have gone down? You know what I mean? Like, because I would assume in those situations, for the most part, it was you, right?
At the Scholastic A group, it was me with the front ensemble, and the concert group was just me.
Okay. So then my follow-up question is we understand that getting to that champion aspect is going to take a whole lot of energy, time, effort to get a group to that point. And the question is it still worth it if you now have a community of people to engage to get students from point A to point B? Or is it still not worth it because in some frame of reference, we're still putting undue stress projected from ourselves because of how we want the group to be on the performers? Like, even if our stress level goes down,
right,
are we still putting the same amount of stress level on our students because of the goals that we have for the ensemble?
I think if our stress is down, I think it lessens the stress that the students get from us. You know, I think that any time that we can show them less stress in our bodies and our voices is always a good thing, because kids are not dumb. They pick up when we're upset, when we're angsty, when we're, whatever. They pick that stuff up in our tone of voice, and they take that from us and they then portray it back to us. But I would also argue, just plain devil's advocate, that when you add more people in on the teaching staff, in theory, it should make it less stressful. But from my experience, and it could just be from some of the teams that I've taught with, when you're the director, you now add another layer of, are these kids getting the information they need? Because it's not coming from me. I don't know what these people have taught. Like, they've only learned from me, or they've learned from this person, but I don't know what kind of information. And at the end of the day, what I did at that time was their success is on me. And I feel like a lot of people in the director role just go like, all right, my shoulders are here, all of the stress, and right on it,
Yeah.
So I think it's really hard. And I'm not saying that since I made that decision of like, I'm not going to stress myself out to that point, that I have accepted less in terms of clarity or quality from groups. I think I've been smarter to go at the beginning of a season, go, all right, this is a group that's going to be competitive. Let's go. All right. This is a group that just needs a year to build. All right. Let's go. If the group that needs a year to build does not get to be as good as the group that is aspiring to be competitive because they're not at the same level, like, why should I, like, this group doesn't need it, so why am I killing myself over it?
Right.
I mean,
go ahead, E.
John.
That was me.
I was gonna drop something, but I can wait.
I'm gonna say it first.
Mine will rotate to the next question. So go ahead, John or Robert.
The only thing I'll say is, as a director, I think it's also important to learn to teach your students to take ownership and to I just learned this today in my online class, but I want to see if I can remember how they put it. They have to take accountability for their own education.
Mm-hmm.
And because, like you said, if the director is running everything, you're going to get burned out. You're going to be super stressed, right? And I think we've talked about this already, but it really comes again back to that teaching aspect of you have to find ways to inspire the kids and to motivate the kids to take ownership for themselves, not only so that they can teach themselves, maybe through independent learning, through maybe watch some videos for some homework or do some research on their own, but also in just opening up their awareness as they're practicing, as they're in a lesson, as they're in an ensemble setting, so that they can become their own teachers and evaluate their skill sets and improve upon things that they need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I wanted to say is you have to find ways, I believe, to teach your students to teach themselves correctly.
Right.
Become more self-aware.
I think that's the biggest struggle, especially when you're in an area where the feeder programs are not as strong, or the feeder programs are younger. Like, how do you, if the goal is to be at a certain level or be competitive, how do you teach them to be self-aware and get them to where they need to be and not feel like you're, in the strongman competition dragging a semi truck behind you?
Yeah. I think a lot of that comes back to the aspect of community and understanding that, one, obviously it is a partnership between the director and the student. But I think what I at least aspire to do is to use my stronger players that also have the influence of their peers and build the community around that student and those students that are the high achievers that are essentially us as directors within the group. You know what I mean? I know that all my kids aren't going to want to go and march independent groups, but I do know that all the kids that are within the group want to be in the group, but they also look up to the kids that do want to go and do those things. So I feel like one of the big things is, one, making the community aspect a big part of it, but also once everybody's there and everybody has that connection, using those students that do have that visibility and that influence within the ensemble to drive the group in that way. Because I feel like the majority of our students, I feel like the smallest part of our students is the high achievers. In most instances, that's like a minute part that they're probably going to pursue music professionally, or they just love doing music for the sake of doing music. I feel like there's another faction of kids, or a larger faction of kids, that are the community kids, that they're just like, I love being in drum on, like, this is great. My friend told me about it. I want to be in the group. And then you have the other kids that, they happen to like learning, they happen to be doing percussion, and maybe they get some type of meaning out of it personally, but they're not a high achiever. But I feel like those other two groups are vastly swayed, specifically on a high school level, by the kids that are the most visible and that are the influencers. And I feel like there are a lot of kids that power of community can help them get better faster, just because they see everybody going in a specific direction. You know what I mean? So I feel like, I know for me, I have always tried to, like you said before, like, you try to teach everybody like they're at this level or whatever your high achiever is, and you want everybody to be high achievers. But I kind of feel like sometimes being a high achiever to a certain degree is something that's exposed to you within a community. You know what I mean? Like, from your parents, from your own neighborhood, and, your family, your school, You know what I mean? There's certain schools that they are high achievers in that way. And I feel like that's something that we can build, but we have to remember that I think we have to be smart about leveraging our influential players and leveraging that influence that they have to make those other kids that are just kind of go with the wind, make them go in that high achieving direction.
One other thing I kind of want to add to what you're saying, Rob, because I totally agree in what you've said with regarding the community and utilizing your stronger players to be that role model. For an individual who has not established a young student to be that role model, again, going back to this new job opportunity that I have, I have an upperclassman who has been doing band for a while, but she does not want to be that role model, and she doesn't really have that drive to influence the younger players. So I think in a situation which you do not have a upperclassman or any student in that position, I think it goes back to that community aspect of just opening up the students' awareness. I'm fortunate where I'm at in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, is that there are so many schools, and both high school and colleges, that are great. But I think in order to build the program that I'm going to be at, to inspire the kids, to kind of create that drive and that hunger, since I don't have anyone that can be a role model, I have to present opportunities for my kids to see those role models in other schools. One thing I really love, what you said about is the community aspect. I think if you have schools we're all educators. I'm sure we have friends in our districts that we can talk to for mentorship or just to see what's going on in their schedules. I think reaching out to them and seeing when they have concerts, percussion ensemble concerts, symphonic band concerts, whatever, or maybe a guest speaker coming in, being able to maybe do a field trip with some of your kids, or maybe doing a live stream, just opening up your kids' awareness to what other schools in the community is doing and kind of inspiring them. I think that's a great opportunity to do if you don't have established role models in your band program.
Well, and so that leads perfectly into the question that I had, the follow-up question on that, kind of shifting what we were talking about, is when do we put that onus onto the kids? Like is it a point where in the beginning of the season we have a conversation with the students to determine what kind of group do you want to be? Or is it something to where, we meet with every student individually to determine what kind of person or goals they have, and then we use the law of averages to determine how we're going to press this group going forward?
I think it depends on how long you've been there, right? For a well-established band program, I think a director kind of leads the charge, but also again gives that ownership to the students. So I believe you would have a meeting with your student leadership team, like your top 5, top 10 of each section, and kind of talk and discuss where you want the goal, short and long term, for your band program to be. I think if you don't have that student leadership set up, and it's just you as the director, I think when you're first building a program, you kind of have to be realistic with your expectations and your goals, and eventually start building that strong student leadership to help you determine the direction of the band program.
So think of it like this way, right? What if the band doesn't want to be ultra competitive? And I'm purely going like devil's advocate on this. Like, what if the band does not want to be purely competitive? Let's say it's an established program. You're a new director coming in. You have ideas and goals about what you want to do, but the determination, or I guess let's say from first sight, you have determined that this is not a group that wants to be ultra competitive, even though all your experiences have been that way.
I think you have to be patient, because in 4 years, those kids aren't going to be there anymore. Right? So I think if you chip away at the band culture year after year and kind of mold it into however you want it, I think you can do that.
Do you guys still have audio for me? I think my headset went out.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think
what?
I oh my God. I agree with what John was saying. However, I do feel like we have to be realistic in what it is that we want, because I do understand that there are some directors that they don't want the competitive aspect, and I think, you know, they're more focused on, you know, having a tight-knit band family, and the excellence and things like that that can be measured practically are kind of a byproduct. You know what I mean? So in some ways, for me, who's a person that's strong on accountability for like, hey, we want to do our best, like your best has to be measured in some way and quantified. You know what I mean? So in some instances, I feel like as a director, if you're the head director or if you're just the percussion director, you have to be honest with that band director to see what their philosophy is and whether or not your philosophies align. Because for me, I feel like I want to be the best that we can be, but ultimately I do want to be the best in general. You know what I'm saying? So I want students, I want colleagues that have that same mentality. Now, will we have to work on the trajectory to get there? Yes, but we still have to have the same end goal that, yes, I want my students to be excellent. I want my students to be the best. I want them to learn from the trajectory and the trip of trying to be the best. I want them to learn lessons from that, and I want them to build a community of people that are striving to be the best. Like that is what their community is built around, because there are some programs where we can be honest, their community is built around the socialization aspect of band. You know what I mean? Like they don't want practical goals, or maybe they're not trying to measure those goals as much as some people that are more high achievers would. So I think that the philosophies of the people that we're working with, as well as the students, have to be aligned, and they have to understand, hey, this is this person's philosophy. You know, maybe that's kind of a culture shift for them. Like, how do I match up with that? You know what I'm saying? So I feel like it has to be a trajectory of making sure that those philosophies are aligned, because if they're not, you can stay there and feel like I want to get to this level, but it's never going to go there if the other person doesn't want it to be on that level too.